My name is Lisa Lazar, and I am the State Director for Educators for Excellence Boston. Thank you to all of our speakers today, especially our educators for sharing their experiences. As a former chemistry teacher myself, I know how it can feel to be the only person of color on staff in a school, or to teach a curriculum that doesn't value your perspective or your students' culture. We tell our students that they can be anything, but rarely do we show our students how that can be achieved. Representation matters, not just in who is teaching, but in what is being taught in our curriculum. On the last day of Black History Month, this is the last time many students would have intentional access to learn about Black history and all the incredible Black people, perspectives, achievements in a real way until next February. The legislators in the building behind me have a chance to change that. An omnibus bill addressing educator diversity and inclusive curriculum has passed out of the Joint Education Committee. The bill is a great start, but it can go even further to strengthen its previous provisions around inclusive curriculum. I urge legislators to amend this bill to ensure every student in Massachusetts learns in a way that fully includes diverse perspectives.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is this good? All right, awesome. I'm going to use my teacher voice as well. Hello to the members of the Massachusetts General Court, particularly the Ways and Means Committee, where the omnibus bill on educator diversity and inclusive curriculum is currently being considered. My name is Stacey Johnson, and I'm currently here today advocating for a more inclusive curriculum framework for Massachusetts schools. This bill should be supported because all voices should be heard. Too often, the stories that are told are very white-centered and leave important voices out. We talk about Massachusetts being at the forefront of progress in education, yet we don't have an inclusive framework to hold schools accountable for continuing that progress. The Massachusetts legislature has the chance to provide a positive, concrete vision for what anti-racist and inclusive curriculum can look like, but the current omnibus bill does not do enough to seize this opportunity. I support a future for our students where anti-racist and inclusive curriculum frameworks create a generation that has an actual accurate understanding of the systemic inequities in our country and the knowledge to propose solutions that address these inequities. I have seen firsthand how having a curriculum that is social justice based and include more perspectives rather than the whitewashed curriculums that we were forced to learn from when we were children really leads to students actually being well-rounded individuals to further our agenda and making sure that our country is what we say, an actual melting pot where everyone feels included.
So, I'm going to use my teacher voice. Can you hear me? My name is Edith Brazil. We stand here on Beacon Hill where my family lived in the 1940s. And then they moved to Roxbury. That's a little bit of history. But what I want to say here is I echo the sentiments of everyone who spoke before me. I am a Boston School graduate, a former teacher and administrator for 32 years. And I still stand here for education because it is not what we do, it is who we are. Boston, and I would say the state of Massachusetts, is a mecca for Black history. But Black history is not taught across the Commonwealth. In 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the second Black man to graduate from Harvard University, an institution built by African enslaved people, petitioned to have Black History Week, which turned into Black History Month. At the time he petitioned, history books defended slavery and the brutal system of white supremacy. As a child, I was taught this whitewashed history in Boston public schools that focused only on slavery. Muta Baruka said, "Slavery isn't African history. Slavery interrupted African history."
Yes.
So at this time, Dr. Carter G. Woodson's vision was that schools would move beyond just celebrating Black History Month, and Black history would be taught as American history. But now here we are, nearly a century later, and we have not moved beyond the limiting teaching of Black history for 1 month. And during this 1 month, we see banners, celebrations, repetition of certain curriculum, and not the expansive Black history that we know exists. Schools have the power to enlighten, encourage, and empower young people by what they teach. When legislators make Black history optional, it sends a message to districts that Black people are not valued. Who agrees with that? Yes! Now, Black history is in the DNA of Boston. As we continue to struggle with COVID-19, our students don't know that one Simus, who was an African enslaved person, discovered the cure for smallpox right here in Boston, who saved generations from getting this disease and sparked and helped create vaccines. How many of you wonder, like me, whether more Black students, if they knew this fact, would pursue a career in science and medicine?
Yes.
Continuing to omit the richness of Black history denies teaching students the full curriculum of American history. James Baldwin said, "You always told me it's time to wait. You have taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's time, and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time." I say to the legislators in the House Ways and Means Committee, it is time to amend the Omnibus Bill and remove the remnants of colonized, whitewashed curriculum which holds Black students hostage from learning opportunities and destroys their lives and their chances in society generation after generation. Our students cannot wait. Thank you.
Hello? Lisa, why'd you have to put me after this? All right, it's really cold, but good afternoon, everyone. My name is Takeru Nagayoshi. I also go by TK, and I'm the 2020 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year and a former high school English and research teacher. Thank you. I also currently teach pre-service teachers in a class called Critical Issues in Education at the Northeastern Graduate School of Education. So throughout my year of service as Teacher of the Year, I've been a staunch advocate for diversifying the educator workforce and for pushing culturally responsive, anti-bias, anti-racist work. So I'm here today excited by the prospect of this omnibus bill that acknowledges the need for both, right? And while I commend the omnibus bill for acknowledging our need to tackle both issues, a racially inclusive workforce and a racially inclusive curricula, I'm also in agreement with my colleagues here today that the current language of the bill does not make explicit enough the language requiring curriculum frameworks to include perspectives of underrepresented groups. As a state Teacher of the Year, I always felt this sense of pride, getting to represent this profession in the Commonwealth. Educators and school leaders would often come up to me literally praising the state of Massachusetts, how inclusive and forward-thinking and progressive our education system is. And yet, at the same time, I grappled with what I believe to be a complacency issue in the state of Massachusetts, especially when it comes to advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion in K-12 spaces. And precisely because of this impression that exists, right? That we're this progressive, forward-thinking state on many issues, when in reality, we have a long way to go. This complacency issue tends to manifest oftentimes in a lack of urgency or a let's not rock the boat type of mentality, even in well-meaning spaces that seek for change. And here's why this is a problem, especially today. As if the gains in 2020 and the racial reckoning that we've had never happened. Our country is seeing a widespread backlash against DEI initiatives like never before, with schools and classrooms serving as the next big political battleground. Several states have made it illegal to talk about our race and the truths about our past and present in the classroom, and the bad faith actors are spearheading this movement are feeling emboldened. It terrifies me, and it terrifies a lot of educators, teachers who are in the classroom right now. I do a lot of DEI work across the country, and it's heartbreaking hearing of the challenges, especially for Black, Indigenous educators of colors in some of these states. I've heard from history teachers put on notice for discussing MLK Jr. text in their classrooms, teachers dragged by their district leader for writing op-eds on civil liberties, LGBTQ plus educators asked not to mention their sexual orientation in the classroom. And when I hear of these stories, it dawns on me how important it is for bills like this to be explicit and unapologetic about what they believe, like how we don't believe in whitewashing our history or banning books because they expose our past, warts and all. That we believe in teaching our kids an accurate history of the systemic inequalities in our country and the perspective of those who've been too far ignored. A racially inclusive curriculum can help the single story narrative or fight against that single story narrative that limits our imagination of underrepresented groups. It helps our students build empathy and inspires them to realize that we share more in common than what our differences seem to imply.
My name is Ralph St. Louis, and I am a high school biology and chemistry educator in Lowell Public Schools. I also stand here representing Teach Plus Massachusetts and the Coalition for Anti-Racism, Equity, Justice, and Education. It is a fact that having positive exposure to educators in curriculum from a variety of races, ethnic groups for both white and minority students can help reduce stereotypes, eliminate unconscious biases, and promote cross-cultural social bonding. Without diverse educators and inclusive curriculum before them, my students can have recognized access and believe in the possibilities that may not have been considered otherwise. For students, representation matters because if you can see it, you can believe it. For many of my students, I'm often their first teacher of color. And we know that research shows that teachers of colors tend to have higher expectations of students of color and are associated with better student achievement. Since entering the workforce, my mission has been to make sure that my students feel seen in the curriculum. Once I'm done developing any lesson, I review it to see where's the relevance, the representation, the intrigue, the social justice perspective. Even DESE explicitly identifies culturally responsive teaching as a key practice moving forward, but does not recognize the absence of resources available for educators. For many educators, this mission is one that requires us to spend our own money and endless hours out of the classroom to refine our curriculum to be relevant and meaningful. If I had these pieces of legislation passed, I wouldn't have students noticing that one particular day I have high energy in class because I got enough sleep the night before, since I didn't have to spend excessive amounts of time reviewing my lessons for inclusive content. Another issue contributing to teacher burnout in an already dwindling field. Having inclusive curriculum means that we could have students across the Commonwealth take ownership of their learning because it reflects them and the world around them. It's about showing more than suffering, challenges, and the perseverance of underrepresented communities. It's about sharing the immense success and accolades. It's hard not to look at an underrepresented community without a lens of suffering if that's all you're taught growing up. But the current omnibus bill does not do enough to seize this opportunity. It is with my highest recommendation that a commission with a trust fund is created that oversees the transition and implementation of these pieces of legislation.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to E4E for having me. Thank you all for coming out on this warm summer evening. My name is Devin Morris. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Teachers Lounge. We do work to recruit, revitalize, and retain educators of color across the greater Boston area and beyond. I'm here this evening advocating on behalf of an amendment to the omnibus bill that incorporates language requiring curriculum frameworks to include the perspectives of unrepresented groups. This is our what, as well as the creation of a commission that oversees this transition and implementation. This is our how. But we come together this evening to talk about and have a conversation about inclusion, not dominance, not exclusivity, not a single story, but quite the opposite. Simply to ensure that our stories, our histories, our perspectives are simply included in our curriculum in an attempt to help better shape the future that we desire for our babies. This added level of detail in the bill further strengthens both our what and our how, but a bit more on our why. While our student populations are becoming increasingly diverse, our Common Core relies on classic, decades-old pieces of literature published primarily by white authors to teach and assess students in grades 6 through 12. And in our high schools, for students taking AP courses, where most of its history courses are heavily Eurocentric, there's little room for teachers to explore supplementary topics or readings while ensuring that our students are prepared to pass end-of-year tests. An NYU Steinhardt research report notes that studies show students are more engaged in literature and history lessons and more likely to have positive perception of their ability to succeed in math and science when they feel connected to learning content where their identities are reflected. Personally, as a student, this content wasn't present in my school's curriculum. There was no curriculum that highlighted and acknowledged my identity, my culture, my family structure. And as a teacher and school administrator, early in my career, I learned that I had to get extremely creative with my content or find spaces outside of my classrooms to have the necessary conversations that affirmed both my identity and the identities of my students. And I found that my students lost themselves in the content when they found themselves included in it. From the simplest step of adding Burson and Calcadan's names, interests, and perspectives to math word problems, up to having students think critically about the world we live in, our accurate history, told from diverse perspectives, and become agents of change for the sake of the future of our communities. We want academic freedom and autonomy for educators, while still upholding academic responsibility. And we have a responsibility to our students, families, and educators if we wish to foster global citizenship in our students. We must include diverse and representative perspectives in our content, curriculum, and discussions. We are seeing states across the country take steps forward, and we are seeing states take steps backwards with regards to anti-racist and inclusive curriculum. A state such as Massachusetts, trailblazing in many aspects of education, has a responsibility to remain steadfast in our pursuit of equity and inclusion for the sake of our babies, our families, and our future.
It is vital that all educators in Massachusetts have inclusive curricula that they need and the professional development that they need and deserve to educate all students in racially, linguistically, and culturally responsive ways. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you today. I'm Jim Vetter, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Social Emotional Learning Alliance for Massachusetts.
Yes.
I also have the honor of serving on the Massachusetts Commission on Behavioral Health Promotion and Prevention. As a grassroots coalition, educators, out-of-school time professionals, parents and caregivers, students, and others who care deeply about the social, emotional, and academic well-being of all young people, we at SEL for Mass deeply appreciate working with Educators for Excellence on this important issue. It is impossible for schools to effectively promote students' social and emotional well-being if they are not teaching in racially, linguistically, and culturally responsive ways. Research has shown that culturally responsive teaching increases engagement with school, decreases dropout rates, and leads to better academic outcomes, especially for students of color. That right now, our colleagues in SEL for Indiana are fighting an incredibly terrible bill that would gag educators from raising any conversation in the classroom that might lead to student discomfort, particularly around topics of race. We in Massachusetts are poised to go in the opposite direction, to make sure we are strengthening the ability of educators to bring culturally responsive issues, to bring anti-racism into the classroom every day. Our children deserve no less.
Check, check. Woo! Right. Take this off too. Hey everyone, my name is Raul Fernandez and I am an educator. I am a faculty member at Boston University where I research, write, and teach about inequities in education, and I cannot tell you there are many. I'm also a policymaker. I'm a Brookline Select Board member. I'm a member of the Racial Imbalance Advisory Council for the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Yes.
I'm actually currently seeking a seat in this body right now as a state representative. What I can tell you right now is that this body and districts across Massachusetts simply have not done enough to stand up for the things that I've heard you all talking about today. That is a racially inclusive curriculum, one that affirms all identities, and by the way, beyond race as well, to make sure that we're affirming all identities so that all our kids and all our families and all our educators feel seen, welcome, and affirmed in the schools. This is something beyond all those other roles that I have. Probably the most important role that I have is as a parent. And I'm a parent of 3 kids of color. And let me tell you, in our community that I believe in Brookline to be, a generally progressive community, I was shocked when our 3rd grader came home with a packet for Indigenous Peoples Day weekend, which is what we celebrate in our community, with a packet that said, be an explorer like Columbus. And what we have to understand is that there is still work to be done in all communities throughout the Commonwealth, every single one, and that there are educators and that there are district leaders and school principals that are working to do the kinds of things that we're talking about right now. But what they need is the back of this State House right here, the State House, to say not just that it's okay to teach a racially affirming curriculum, a culturally competent curriculum, but that it is necessary to do so. Something that folks may not know is that in our public schools across the U.S. today, we are just as racially segregated today as we were over 50 years ago. And so while there is much known about the devastating, harmful impacts of segregation on students of color, on kids of color, less is known about the devastating and harmful impacts of segregation on white folks as well. And so what we need to do is to make sure that all students, regardless of whether or not they have an educator of color, regardless of how many kids of color are in their classroom, that all students are understanding the true and accurate history of these United States of America and the world. We see in our own policy making that the lack of representation that we have at this State House and elsewhere is leading to policy that is bland at best and certainly insufficient, and it just simply ain't gonna get the job done. So what we're asking for folks to do is to actually do what's necessary, to do what's in their hearts, to actually create language, to create policy that does what they say they want it to do, which is to make sure that we have racially affirming, accurate, historically accurate, welcoming schools. And so I stand with all the folks here. I thank you for the time, and please, let's get this done. We'll be there with you. Thank you very much.